The archives tell a story of progress, but the brickwork tells a story of survival. In the mid-19th century, specifically between 1850 and 1900, the official record describes an era of unprecedented urban reconstruction. In Chicago, the narrative claims the entire city was raised by hydraulic jacks to install a modern sewage system. In Washington, D.C. and St. Petersburg, we are told of massive, street-leveling projects to combat the swampy terrain. But when you look at the documented history exposed and then forgotten, the logistical reality collapses. We are asked to believe that a young, fledgling society, one still utilizing horse-drawn carriages and hand-cranked tools, undertook the gargantuan task of lifting thousands of multi-story masonry buildings simultaneously. In the 1850s, Chicago supposedly stood on stilts while life continued as normal, but the photographs of that era show something else. They show cities already half submerged. They show grand, neoclassical facades where the primary entrances are 10 feet above the ground, and the original first floors have been hastily converted into dark, damp basements. These weren't just foundations. These were finished, ornate architectural layers that were systematically buried under millions of tons of fill. We are told this was a choice, a sanitary necessity. Yet the sheer volume of earth required to raise a city by 10 to 15 feet is a geological impossibility for the industrial capacity of the 1860s. Where did the dirt come from? And why, in every major city from Seattle to Moscow, do we see the same pattern of buried glory? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The lifting of cities was not an act of building upward. It was a desperate attempt to reclaim a civilization already drowning in a global sediment event that the history books refuse to name. When we examine the physical iron logic of these buildings, the official narrative of utilitarian design fractures. Architecture is governed by the laws of economy and thermodynamics. You do not build what you do not need. Yet the 19th century urban landscape is defined by an excessive scale that defies practical sense for the humans of that era. Consider the ceilings. In the old world buildings of the 1800s, ceiling heights of 4 to 5 meters 13 to 16 feet are the standard, even in humble administrative offices. To heat such a space with a coal fireplace is a thermodynamic nightmare. The heat rises and leaves the occupants in a permanent chill. Why would a supposedly primitive society waste 50% more brick and 100% more heating energy on empty air? Then there are the windows. Walk down any street in the historic center of London, Boston, or Odessa. Look at the windows that peek out from the sidewalk. These are not ventilation shafts. If you dig them out, you find full-sized, arched window frames, often with decorative keystones and high-quality masonry, extending deep into the earth. Why would a builder expend the lubca and capital to decorate a window that was intended to be buried in the dirt? The scale of the doors, the massive width of the staircases, and the thickness of the walls suggest a context that has been stripped away. We see buildings designed for a different atmospheric pressure, a different climate, or perhaps a different inhabitant altogether. The iron anomaly is the presence of grand finished architecture in places where, according to the blueprints, it shouldn't exist, under the ground and above the reach of the average man. The people of the mid to late 19th century did not look like the creators of these cities. They looked like survivors. When we look at the internal adaptation of these structures, we see a systematic downscaling. In the wake of whatever event left these buildings mired in sediment, the new inhabitants moved in. But they didn't know how to use the space as it was intended. We see magnificent ballrooms partitioned with cheap wooden slats into cramped communal housing. We see grand fireplaces blocked up or replaced with crude iron stoves. The majestic halls, originally designed for acoustics and light, were treated as mere shells. History of the tenement is often told as a story of overpopulation, but architecturally it is a story of adaptation. The settlers of the 1800s were repurposers. They found a world of stone and iron and tried to make it habitable for a world of wood and coal. This explains the oddity of 19th century plumbing and wiring. It is always surface-mounted, an afterthought drilled into thick, ancient walls that were clearly never designed to hold the pipes of the industrial age. We see the human trace in the way they filled the buried floors with coal dust and trash, turning the lower levels into service areas to hide the fact that the original street level was now 10 feet below their boots. They were living in the attic of a much larger civilization, trying to convince themselves they had built the whole house. It is the melancholy of a child wearing his father's oversized suit, pretending it was tailored for him. Historians offer us the cultural layer as a catch-all explanation. They claim that cities naturally sink or that dust and debris accumulate over centuries, raising the ground level. This is the primary shield against the truth of the mud flood or the global sediment deposit. But the math of the cultural layer does not hold up to archival scrutiny. To accumulate 2 meters over 6 feet of cultural layer in a span of 50 to 100 years would require a catastrophic lack of sanitation that is nowhere recorded. Furthermore, cultural layer is composed of organic waste, trash, and decomposed materials. It is soft, stratified, and messy. What we find beneath our streets is not dust. It is homogeneous, mineral-rich clay and sand. More importantly, look at the masonry. When a building is excavated today, the brickwork that has been underground for 150 years is often in better condition than the brickwork above. It is clean. The mortar is intact. The decorative moldings are sharp. If these buildings had been gradually swallowed by dirt and grime over decades, the moisture and acidity of the soil would have eroded the facade. The fact that the buried portions are pristine suggests they were covered rapidly, in a single event or a very short window of time, by a massive influx of sediment that sealed the masonry away from the elements. Why did dirt accumulate at a rate of 10 centimeters per year in the 19th century, only to stop completely in the 20th? Why does the official explanation require us to ignore the laws of geological deposition? The answer is simple. The cultural layer is a bureaucratic term used to hide a global architectural reset. The architecture isn't an isolated glitch. It is part of a synchronized global inventory phase. Between 1840 and 1950, the world underwent a transformation that was as much about erasing the old as it was about establishing the new. 1840–1850, the maps change. The vast empire of Tartaria, once featured in every major atlas, is scrubbed and replaced with Russia and the Great Plains. 1846, the Smithsonian Institution is established, ostensibly to increase and diffuse knowledge, but in practice, to act as a central repository for problematic artifacts that didn't fit the new Darwinian timeline. 1840's 1880s. This was the period where, alongside the buried floors, accounts of giant skeletal remains were being reported in thousands of local newspapers before being seized by institutional agents. 1890, the Great Census Fire in the United States destroys nearly all the 1890 census records, effectively erasing the demographic data of the people who inhabited these found cities. 1914–1945. 2 world wars provide the perfect cleansing mechanism, allowing for the strategic bombing and total demolition of the most anomalous architectural sites in Europe and Asia. This 110-year window was a period of archaeological sanitation. They were cleaning the slate. They were digging out the red brick cities, renaming them and assigning them new founding fathers. The synchronization is too perfect to be accidental. The same mud that buried the first floors of Chicago also buried the true history of the people who built it. Documented history was exposed during the excavations, scrutinized by the elite, and then systematically forgotten by the public. If we are wrong, where are the original blueprints? If these buildings were constructed using the technology of the 19th century, the architectural plans should be a point of national pride. Yet, when researchers dig into the provenance of the world's most anomalous structures, they hit a wall of ash. In 1865, a catastrophic fire at the Smithsonian Institution destroyed the National Archive of Artifacts and Documents. In city after city, from the Great Fire of Chicago to the burning of San Francisco, the story is always the same. The records were lost. We are left with artists' impressions and commemorative sketches made years after the fact, but the actual technical drawings, the ones showing the foundations, the original street levels, and the structural engineering, are missing. When modern researchers attempt to use the Freedom of Information Act to access subterranean surveys or historical soil samples, they are met with national security exemptions or lost file notices. The archives are not there to help us remember. They are there to manage what we are allowed to know. They tell us we built these cities in an era of steam and shovels, while the stones themselves whisper of a lost high-technology civilization that was wiped from the map. We look at our cities today and see a finished product. We see asphalt and glass, but if you look closely at the basement of a post office or the foundation of a cathedral, you will see the truth. We are squatters in a museum we don't understand. We did not build these cities. We found them, we washed the mud from their windows, and we moved in. We adapted the grand to the mundane, and in our arrogance, we assumed the role of creators. but the sand beneath our feet holds the memory of the real architects. We did not build these cities. We found them, we washed them, and we forgot who they were meant for. The buildings remember, but we do not.